Quiet on the set. Here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody. I'm Dear Myrtle, your not so retired friend in genealogy. Welcome to the fourth and final episode of the 2025 Albion Seed Book Club. And we are going to be talking about the Borderlands to the backcountry. Apparently, I wanted to type the colon twice in that on that screen on that graphic. Crazy old Myrt. And this is the flight from North Britain from 1717 to 1775. Now, our panelists are Hillary and Maria, and Maria's our point person, and we're sending our hugs out to Christine. She's excused today. So, Maria, I think you are the point person, and you want to start on page 7. Is that correct?
That's right. I'd like to start with Hillary.
Okay.
Right.
So, hopefully everybody there is on, has seen that there's a link to the handout there in the chat as well as in the description, and you can follow along. I'm using Word. You have the PDF version, so it'll print out no matter what. Okay, back to Hillary. I'll be quiet.
Yeah. I've looked at this migration from the point of view of the area that they came from in the north of Britain, or the north of England, south of Scotland, that area. It was very much a disputed area. It was a borderland between England and Scotland. These photographs, this first one and the second one, these are both areas adjacent to Hadrian's Wall, which is the wall that the Romans built to keep out the Scots, pretty much, or whatever they called them at that time. They may not have been called the Scots. I can't remember off the top of my head. Anyway, so they built this wall, and although there is still some woodland there, it was probably a lot more woodland at the time when these people migrated from there. So it was probably there was probably more of a forest, and this isn't exactly on the border, but it is part of that border area where these people would have come from. And the third photograph there is a photograph of what is a part of what is remaining of Carlisle Castle, which was to the west. It was in that would be Cumberland, I think it was, which is to the west of Northumberland, and that was one of the areas that they came from as well. It pretty much runs. It's pretty much at one end almost of the Hadrian's Wall, which runs right across the country there. So this was an area where there were very much disputes going on. There were pretty much warriors, and there was no real. Well, people had to build sort of fortress homes, really. I haven't actually put a picture up of it, but they had what were called Bastille houses. Quite a lot of them are still around, but a lot of them have been converted now. And they basically had their animals on the ground floor, and they lived above there where the animals were, and they could pull up a stairs as a ladder that you could climb up. You could use to get up to the next at the top layer. You could pull that up from the top, so that it made it a bit more difficult for your enemies to get in there, and they had quite small. As you can see in the castle, you have quite small windows and almost more like, well, a lot of our castles have arrow slits. They don't have great huge windows in them and things to make it easier to defend. So,
Hillary, when I went to Sweden and we went to a restored kind of a place that had sample housing that they'd moved.
Mm.
I recall that same thing where it was a 2-story, and the lower level was for their animals, the middle hallway, and you could pull the ladder up, although they put in steps for us touristas. And then you lived upstairs, but the windows were very small. The whole thing was very dark inside. So I wonder if that was because of the Vikings and some kind of influence there historically, like anciently.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, it certainly was an area where the Vikings were around in that part, and even a bit further south than that, you would have got a lot of the Vikings and that. I mean, you've got York, York is in North Yorkshire, which is right on the border of that area where they were coming from. Some of them may have come from that far south, and North Yorkshire. No, there was very much the Vikings that were around, and it's very much known for that sort of in that area.
I think some of it also is like when I was in Sweden, because the weather. I mean, if you had a lot of open windows in the winter, that was just really, really cold. So some of it, I think, may have been protection, but I think some of it's also environment, and also the fact that they probably couldn't afford a lot of glass. So I think it's probably multi reasons.
Yeah, I mean, we used to have window tax over here at one point, and people were charged on the number of windows they had and this sort of thing. And only the wealthy could really afford to have anything much. So, you know, if you can't glaze it to keep the wind and rain out, it's not very nice in the winter months if you've got wind blowing through it, and that. And certainly, they probably came from that, with coming from that sort of environment. They've come probably into a similar sort of environment when they came over to the backcountry areas that were around. I know they were probably more used to the sort of conditions in the backcountry than maybe some of the other settlers were. Yeah.
So I'm just curious. They talked about the prejudice that people had, that the Puritans and the Virginians had against these Northern Englanders from Ireland and Scotland, thinking that they were backward. And was that something that stayed in England, or is maybe even something that's still kind of there, or is that not so much?
Well, these would have probably been, they wouldn't have been most of these probably wouldn't have been what they were given the class structure. They wouldn't have been in the higher classes. They would have been, they've got some skills, obviously, because they managed to survive. They from one generation to the next, they managed to survive because they had those skills of being able to make the most of what was available. But they weren't going to be people that necessarily settled down in one place. They're probably used to having to move around in order to survive. So I think they might have been classed in more recent centuries, certainly sort of in the 19th century, they might have been classed as the vagrants, the ones that moved from around, and possibly still like what you might class as might be classed as a gypsy or a Romany even. Nowadays, travelers, people that like to move around, they probably would have been classed in that sort of area, which again, they still get looked down upon by others, people that living in more permanent accommodation.
Sure.
It's I think some of it's also because obviously some of these people that move around don't pay some of the taxes and things that people might expect them to pay, which is probably puts a bit of a prejudice on some of it. But yeah, I wouldn't have thought they weren't the higher classes of people, that not like the Virginia Cavaliers and things like that. So
right. Myrt, you had a question or a comment?
Well, David Hackett Fischer did say that the housing was ruggedly, the houses were ruggedly built, and that they lived a rugged lifestyle, that would not be welcome at a, Virginia Cavaliers linen covered dining room table with silverware and candelabras and all that. And so the homes that were built in America, I mean, this forced them to move farther inland, and that's why they lived in the backcountry. I think the Cavaliers like that buffer zone between their wonderful plantations and the indigenous people. And anyway, and their houses had, again, no glazing, no windows, just little openings. So I can't imagine having to live like that. We live a different lifestyle, don't we? All of us.
Yeah.
I mean, here we are in our heated homes with computers and electricity. So.
That's right. And I know that when you were talking about the way that they farmed and did things, that some people thought they were lazy, but I liked how Mr. Fisher said that they just did it differently. And it might have been lazy to some people, but they just did it differently. And I really appreciate this book for the fact that it's really helping you understand that different people have different backstories, and different is different, not
bad or good.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah. Just because somebody does something one way doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way. You might find that sometimes, given this different situation, that the way that somebody else is doing it is probably better.
Mm-hmm.
And they displayed their dresses instead of tapestries. So there you go.
Yep. I'm going to pull your homework back up so you can get to the rest of your part. There you go.
Yeah. It was interesting. The quote that I got from the book is about the fact that the male children were taught to be self-asserting. They had to stand up for themselves. They had to be able to fight and hunt and all those sort of things to survive. Whereas the female children were trained to be self-denying. They had to be the ones that that did the looking after. They had to be there and in the background and made sure that the food was there and all that sort of thing. That didn't mean to say they weren't doing anything, because they had to be quite strong in a different way.
Yes.
They said that they would do a lot of the chores that the men would do, and that was kind of weird.
Yeah, they'd go out in the fields and do what they needed to in the fields. They'd go out and look after the animals, because if the men were away fighting, you had to.
Yeah, I can't imagine if they're away fighting with the clan on some family feud like the Hatfields and the McCoys. I'd have to go out, if I remember, if I lived then, I'd have to go catch a rabbit, check the baited traps, and skin a rabbit if I wanted to feed my children. That's not something a wife of a Cavalier was doing.
There's a story about my Scottish great-great-grandmother that they had to move some grain, and their cart broke down, and had another cart, and they had to move the grain, and the guy went to go get some help, and my great-great-grandma, and she was older at this time, she was like, didn't want to wait, and so she just moved these 90-pound sacks herself and just drove off.
Oh my gosh.
Just did it.
Yep. Yeah. And as I sort of discussed, the other settlers may have treated them as what they called heathen, but basically they had their own religious beliefs. They were very, very much opposed to the established church and its clergy, but they weren't necessarily a uniform group. They all had their perhaps believers in a different sex and that, because they weren't necessarily all going to be not like some of the others where you got all the Puritans or the all the Quakers and that they all got their very, very similar beliefs, and they all came in together. They came in, but because their lifestyle was the same, not necessarily because their religious beliefs were exactly the same.
That's right. Well, when they're in the borderlands and they have one government that fails them, and the next government fails them, and they don't trust what all these people say, they go like, fine, I'm going to do it myself. I can see that. Yeah. Well, thanks, Hillary. Anything else?
No, I think that was the end. I didn't put a little bit, but not a huge amount.
Great. Do you mind putting up my homework now, Pat?
You bet. I'll be happy to. Okay, got it.
So there's just way too much information to highlight in just a couple pages. So I just thought I'd highlight the fact that them coming from the struggling thing carried over into their different folkways. And I just chose 3 examples. But I like this map that Pat has put in that kind of highlights where these backways were. I mean, they were scattered through all the colonies, not just, one place, but kind of scattered around down through the
Yeah, I was surprised when I saw this map. And this is directly from page 637 in the book, that Massachusetts had the backcountry up here. Yeah, it wasn't the Cape Cod area. That was the backcountry.
And I think he talks about that in the conclusion, how people had to deal with different things depending on where they lived. Like people along the coast had to deal with the sea and the storms there versus the backcountry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is true.
Yeah. So some of the things that they did, like I thought the abduction thing, it totally reminded me of 7 Brides for 7 Brothers, where they thought it was totally okay to go abduct brides, but this is something that they brought from the northern country, and sometimes really happened, and sometimes it was just for fun because they just liked the whole idea, I guess. And Andrew Jackson has said that he actually did that with his wife. Of course, she totally agreed with that, but she was in a very yucky relationship, and so he kind of took her.
She was happy for it.
Yes, she was happy about that. But yeah, in Appalachia, as I was studying this, they talked about how it kind of turned into something called chivalry. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they would take the bride and carry her in a tub, or sometimes they put the groom in on a rail and carry him around. And of course, everybody would make a ruckus and kind of embarrass them about what was going to happen. And it was just crazy party, and some people are like that, and they like the tension, they like the mocking, and the one those sometimes I guess they would take the husband or the groom and take him out in the backwoods and see if he couldn't find his way back home before he was supposed to get married. But I'm glad my brothers didn't try to do anything crazy. Maybe that's the whole decorating of the car now. I
think that, yeah, the tin cans and all that.
Right.
Yeah, behind the car.
Yeah. So Ageways was also kind of interesting. The fact that sometimes the matriarch was really well respected. It talked about an aunt that everybody respected, but she was pretty strengthy. And sometimes the aunt, if the kids were misbehaving, even the teenage boys, they were afraid of her and respected her. But some of the old people, they didn't, if they weren't a strong personality, they were weak and they were despised. And yeah. So it's totally different from like Puritan, who respected the elderly. But yeah, it was completely depending on your personality and how strong you were. And it kind of they thought it maybe come from the rule of tanistry, which is in the backcountry, they would vote when the leader was passed away, they would vote on who was the next person. So there was this YouTube that I thought was really kind of explained it well, and I put it in the footnotes. So unlike it being the firstborn son, as they're showing at the beginning of this, it would be whoever had the most charisma and who was just stronger. So the youngest son could be the person.
So wasn't that primogeniture that we were accustomed to in Virginia?
No.
So if Mr. Myrt and I lived in this time period in the backcountry of Tennessee, let's say, and he really excelled even at his age during the Highland Games type competitions, he might be the next elder.
Yeah.
The next leader.
Yeah. It was interesting that they and they talked about further in the chapter about how they really got into different sport games, and they think a lot of our track and field came from maybe this group of people because they just really enjoyed these different games and sports and competition. And of course they had to compete to survive along the borderlands all the time. It was just like part of who they were.
Yeah.
And they go out. It reminds me actually, just I'm going to segue squirrel just a little bit. When I worked full time, I was going on a training and I got on a airplane and there was a guy from, I think, Oklahoma, but he was a professional bareback rider. He was the champion horse bareback rider the year before. And he says that when things start getting a little crazy, his wife can't wait to kick him out of the house because she likes it when he goes away. And maybe the women liked it when the guys went away back then.
I don't know. I don't know. So what is this about the barring out?
So they had the barring out was kind of a friendly thing that they would try to do in some of the schools where the boys would bar the way for the professor couldn't get in, and they would say, "We will let you in only if you agree to give us a longer vacation for the holidays."
Oh my gosh.
However, that didn't always work in the Americas. Sometimes in the Americas, the professors would get together and gang against the students, and they would actually get a little bit more physical. But yeah, kind of fun. And wouldn't that be nice if we could have a little longer vacation from other things? But
yeah, I can remember when Carrie wanted to take her daughter out of like first grade to do a family vacation because that's when they could do it as far as the dad's work. And it was only like 2 days of first grade that the kid was going to miss. And the teacher got pretty darn upset about it.
Really?
So I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm glad we're all kind of bringing up different points because it's so hard to choose. So much of this is so interesting. It's hard to choose what to talk about. Your turn, Pat.
Okay. Well, I went to my handouts or my own notes from, remember those manila envelopes that are stuffed with the overhead transparencies, but I still have great notes. And I can tell that on year one of presenting, I wrote with black ink, and then I added the pink ink and then the green. So now these are like totally scribbled on. But I had a lot of fun with this chapter because it was so distinctly, the characteristics of the people in this migration pattern were so distinctly different. And remember, different is just different. It's not bad or good. We think one of the things that the author mentions is thinking of the, even though it was male-dominated gender roles, you think of the mountain grandmother kind of midwife. She knew all the little remedies and how to use the herbs and things to heal naturally, things like that. I kind of like that back to nature thing, but with indoor plumbing and occasional cell phone service, that's kind of nice. So let me share this part of my homework that I thought was interesting. When we talked about New England, they were very structured. The road came through town. There was a little wider part in the center of town, and the homes were built around there with the property out back. And the church was also on that square. And I think this is part of how they kept on top of each other, the judgmental aspect of it all. But this was a typical backcountry settlement, and I adapted this from page 761 in the book, where you'd have a river with all its little tributaries from up in the hollows in the mountains. And so these are individual homes built here and there on those tiny little creeks. And so they didn't have such a structured arrangement. I like that, but I think this living in isolation like this, it's just a very different, I mean, your neighbors did not know what was going on because they weren't living right next door to you like they were in town. The description of the houses that the author gave us was that they were made out of log cabin type materials, logs, just hastily built, not like last time we met when the Quakers had built a 2-story outhouse where there was storage up in the attic, and it was built out of stone, and it would last for, I mean, some of them have lasted to this day, whereas, log cabins just eventually wear out. And the homes had dirt floors and just simple openings in place of windows. So they would sleep on the floor on ferns, like they just freshen it up with ferns. He also described these folks as landless tenants or under tenants whose property consisted of the 4-legged kind. And so that was the wealth, was, if you could call it wealth, if a judgmental aristocrat could even understand how valuable the pigs are. I mean, an entire feud was built upon the loss of a pig. And also, the clans would enforce their own rules and mete out punishments as they saw fit without benefit of judge or jury. So I thought that was intriguing. More so than in other areas, the author spent time in this chapter, and I just picked 5 words here, where the pronunciation in the first column is what we're seeing from these backwoodsmen versus what word they were trying to say, like, I hired somebody today to help me out, or why are you going, or narrow instead of narrow. I can't even say the right word now. I'm getting into that. Yeah. Yes, I'm sorry that you've lost your sound all of a sudden. Sometimes that happens. So, Deneen, yes, watch the replay. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. But apparently, Hillary, if you were to go up to the Southern Highlands in Scotland or along the border area or in Northumberland, you still see traces of that kind of an accent, according to the author.
They have got quite distinctive accent in that. In a lot of the country, we've still got distinctive accents.
That's one of the things that first drew me to Albion Seed, was the comparison back and forth in almost every chapter. It's just that he spent a lot more time in this chapter talking about how just the way they speak tells you they're back from that Northumberland area or parts of Ireland. In fact, I think there was one part, the folks that I've kind of use poetic license to say that these folks were underfed, underemployed, and undereducated in the normal book sense, but they had the street smarts, if you ask me.
Exactly.
And there's a big difference. You got to have both, kind of, it depends. And the ones in Ireland were so desperate that some of them, in attempting to escape, got in like he called them open boats. I'm thinking a glorified rowboat, and tried to go across the Irish Sea and drowned, because that water is very treacherous. And I know that it was treacherous because much later, when we had the potato famine in Ireland, part of the problem of getting food from England to the people in Ireland was navigating around to the far side to avoid the treacherous waters between England and Ireland. Yeah. All right. So that's about what I had to contribute. We do have 4 different migration patterns. These are not the only groups that came to help settle America. But these are what David Hackett Fischer called the 4 British Folkways in America. And I kind of enjoyed the book.
Yeah. When I started going through his conclusion, it was interesting how he talked about how even though they came for different reasons, some people came because they were starving, some people came because they were the second or third son, and some people, come because religious reasons. It sounded like he said, I don't know if I can find it quick, but all these different people helped come together to help make this new community better, stronger, better, Mixing all this together made us a better people.
Yes, if we can just now learn to appreciate the variety, it would be good. Yeah, I sometimes forget about the conclusion chapter. And so I added a few comments there. May I share that?
Please.
Okay.
I'm glad you did.
Okay. So in addition to these 4 extremely meaty chapters where he tried to focus on one migration group and then occasionally would break into comparing and contrasting between them, the conclusion chapter is tremendous. I mean, we could spend 4 weeks on that chapter alone. It's chock full of maps, which Mr. Myrt would love, timelines, comparison tables, like this one, where according to his estimation, and you'd have to see his citation and his references for how he arrived at these percentages of what percentage were farmers versus artisans. And then I just listed 4 of the other tables. There are more, but I really want to encourage people to do what we have done as panelists. Study this chapter, and this is really going to extend your learning experience about these 4 groups, and consider how their folkways persist even to this day. Like we've noted just how they pronounce things. Yeah. Okay. So that's where we are.
Yeah. Interesting. Some of the words that some of these different groups use, I recognise as people being still using them today in this country.
Mm-hmm.
So some things last, and there are differences in terminology even just across the country. Now, if you live in the south of the country, you might use one word. If you live in the north of the country, you might use another word for exactly the same thing, but it's just the way the things have become common usage in a particular area.
Some of the food kind of stays the same too. Sorry, Dad, go ahead.
No, you're right. The food ways are, are things that we inherit. What we fix for Thanksgiving dinner for the side dishes, and whether you had turkey or did you have ham or whatever. I forgot what I was going to say, and it was really an important thing.
Was it about what Hillary was saying with?
Oh yes, I noticed. I uh, I rented rooms from a wonderful gal in Florida after my kids had grown and gone off to college. And she was a genealogist, and she would invite me occasionally to go up and spend the weekend at her cousin's house in Georgia, a suburb of Atlanta, somewhere in that greater Atlanta area. And one of the words she used was the verb carry. And she used it in conjunction with their elderly aunt, the mother, their mother's, these two cousins' mother's sister, who could hardly walk. And the lady would say, I carried her to the doctor on Tuesday. And I'm like, I know she's elderly, but how would you physically carry her? But that was just, I took her to the doctor on Tuesday. But that was one of those little things. And I call it a colloquialism, and that may not be the right term, but it was peculiar to that area because later when I got to know this woman's daughter, who was my age and had and college educated, she still used that word in that manner. So it's just a thing. We can kind of tell, I can tell the difference between a Shenandoah Valley Southern accent and a Tennessee Southern accent. I think do you call it soda or pop or Coke, even if it's not Coca-Cola? I mean, you know how we have words that we use differently in different areas. Anyway, do we have any questions from the attendees? We've got about 6 or 7 people that have been there before Deneen left.
No, I don't see any questions. I'd highly recommend this book to anyone. I mean, it does discipline. It's not like a quick romance or anything like that, but it's definitely expanded my world in a lot of ways.
So when you say in a lot of ways, did you have people in this migration group that we're talking about?
I have people, actually, I think in all of them, but I didn't know until I started this. But by expanding my vision, I mean, it just takes you in and helps people become real. I mean, you read history, but it's deep diving and thinking about the way that they worship and the way that they get along, or where they settled, where they built a house. It just puts you more into it than just reading just the basics of the history. This war, they settled. Add some more adjectives to the people versus just the nouns. Here's a man, but now you know this man is yellow and he likes to eat pork.
So this is the difference between doing straight genealogical research of child to parent to grandparent using documents that may indicate kinship. What this is social history. And it's so essential. I once attended a evening class at GRIP when it was called the Genealogical Research Institute of Pittsburgh. Now, I don't know what NGS calls it, but they still call it GRIP, different standing. Never mind about the name. Warren Bittner gave a talk, and he talked about all sorts of U.S.-based migrations, but not about time period. He talked about the migration group and recommended certain books, and I bought almost every single book to use as a reference work. And they were social history books to help you get exactly this kind of information in our brains. Because, I mean, as hard as we try, we were born in the 20th century. Some of my younger followers very recently in the 21st century. And I didn't go through World War II like my parents did. I didn't go through the Great Depression. So even though I'm older than all of you guys, my view of life in America is still distinctly different just from one generation older. And this is why we study social history.
And even though this was a book about how these people had gone to settle in America, it's important to understand why they moved in the first place, and how what their living conditions were. For me, what their living conditions were like in England, because that's where my ancestors would have been. Where would my ancestors have fitted in this whole thing? Or my husband's, all my husband's and my son's ancestors really will have lived in different parts of the country. Like he's got family from Norfolk and Lincolnshire, and so one part of the country and that area, and that in the Midlands, and people I've researched people going to Kent. Mine is mostly South England, but people have moved into different areas. So although so far I may be researching a particular area, I don't know where my ancestors would have necessarily been living in the 1600s or the 1700s, because there's only a very few of them I may have actually got that far back with. So it gets more difficult once you get beyond the census years to work out where your family is. So it's important to understand what was going on in the country. It shows how
various
turmoil. Yeah, it shows how much turmoil there was, particularly post Henry VIII and the formation of the Church of England. That had obviously had some big influences on people, and people don't underestimate what effect that had.
Yeah. Well, I was intrigued when you applied to be a panelist, because of course I would always have you be a panelist if you want to. But I had not thought and didn't appreciate how good it was to have you on the panel, because you have some current knowledge, but now I see it benefited you because it helps you historically in your own research to consider. But I do wish that some of your people had come over here so you could be neighbors with me and Maria.
Well, I've got cousins in the United States who have got ancestors that have lived in the United States for at least a few generations that I know of. I only know so far back, and they were in places like Mississippi. So I'm just wondering if they were perhaps from the very north of England or something. So they share one of my lines, but their other line might have come from a different part of England. They've got what was probably an English.
There is a migration group. There's this whole thing of Southern research that DearMYRTLE does. He teaches institute courses on it, and there are migrations from Tennessee and North Carolina into Mississippi, and they could have been slave owners, but I'm not sure when those people came over to tie it to that migration pattern that I'm thinking of. Interesting. Our time is almost straight up time to go. We got 2 comments I want to share. First of all, I think you deserve a round of applause, Maria. Good job. Thank you so much. And it was interesting to get to know this side of your family history. I actually think of you as more Quaker-like as far as your temperament. And it's just interesting what different people inherit or what choices they make for their lifestyle. So Kathy says, carry through me for a long time too. Yep. And Bobby says she used to work for a gentleman who's born, raised, and lived in Texas, but used to say, I'll carry you to lunch, for I'll take you to lunch. Yes. Kathleen is saying, I have Mayflower descendants, indentured servants who came with the Cavalier, and some into South Carolina. And Bobby says, this has been so helpful. I'm glad. I have ancestors who came from all 4 of these areas. Interesting.
Yeah.
Mm.
All 4.
You see, I come from one of the places in Mayflower. One's what came from, because they stopped off. I think they started out in various places, but they certainly stopped off in Southampton for quite a long time, for quite a while. And I grew up with this park in Southampton called Mayflower Park. So we know about the Mayflower heritage.
Yes.
This side of the river, of the pond, shall we say?
Shall you say, yes. So I don't have Mayflowers, but I suspect that my my wonderful stepmother people, the Hazards, who I've got them in Western Massachusetts, and I don't know if they're those backwoodsy kind or if they're the Mayflower. I have to find hazards that are associated with Mayflower, but I can't make that now. If I had a week, I get that stuff settled. Anyway, folks, we have had a wonderful 4 sessions together. I really thank my panelists. We locked in the weeds of this book. It's just club is going to be, do I have it here? Yes, I do. Let me pull it up. In January, we're going to be doing the Stripped Bear Guide to citing and using history sources by Elizabeth Shown Mills, and it's going to be a 4 session as well. And I did put out a post